Welcome back to the Garmin Gravel School, where we check in with some of our favorite athletes as we head into Unbound this year. I'm your host, Kristen Legan, and today we are here with one of the most exciting up-and-comers, at least to me, in the gravel world. He's also one of the easiest to spot on the bike, being probably the tallest guy out there. Today we're chatting with pro gravel racer, Brennan Wertz. Brennan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So Brendan, you're on the newer side of professional gravel racing. You're not new to it, but you're on the newer side, with just a few years under your belt with some pretty solid results. But I will say that you're not totally new to high level competition. Can you share a little bit about your rowing background and some of the major results you have through that?
Yeah, before getting into cycling or competitive racing, road, gravel, mountain bike, I did 8 years of rowing, competitive rowing. So I did that through high school and college, and did my summers with the national team. We travel around Europe racing at the World Cups and World Championships. And in 2018, we managed to win the U23 World Championships in the 8-man boat. So that was a really cool opportunity and experience. Had some injuries from there, and sort of the classic story that everyone's heard before. Started just cycling a bit to cross train and stay in shape, and then realized I was having so much more fun cycling and exploring. And it was a little bit around the pandemic too, when there was a bunch of, it was hard to do team sports, and just going out and riding solo for hours on end was kind of an available option, and just really quickly fell in love with it. And now I'm really stoked to be able to travel around and race gravel. It's a discipline I'm really excited about.
Do you do any rowing at all or any training around rowing at all anymore?
Nope. No, pretty much since 2018 when I stopped, I haven't done it at all since then. The injuries I had were sort of in my ribs, and it was a very specific rowing injury. And I could ride, I could do pretty much everything in my day to day life without any discomfort. But that rowing motion was still excruciating. And I went out once with my dad and a couple of his master's teammates like a year later, and immediately felt it again. So it was interesting to feel that, but fortunately cycling doesn't bother it at all. So I've just sort of switched, haven't looked back, and I'm honestly having so much fun doing it that don't really see a reason to do anything else.
Nice. Well, yeah, I was going to ask, how is that transition been from going from being a world champion rower, and then going into gravel? What are some of the bigger differences you've seen, being solo on the bike versus being in, a group, team atmosphere on the boat?
I think the biggest thing in preparation and training and just that transition is going from prepping for a 5.5 minute race to Unbound could be 10 to 11 hours. Like,
Wow.
it just such different ends of the spectrum of preparation. So, we didn't really eat anything. There was no nutrition. You're never eating anything while you're racing and rowing. Like, it's basically just an all out VO2 effort kind of sprint that just is like the super uncomfortable distance. But so yeah, I really enjoyed that element of coming over to gravel racing, and the endurance side of it and the mechanical side of it, like having to maintain your bike while you're out there and take care of yourself and navigate yourself and just make sure that like you're heading in the right direction, figuratively and literally. With rowing, we had in the 8-man boat, we had a coxswain who's the person who's steering the boat. So they have little cables and a rudder. So they're looking forwards towards the finish line, and we're all facing the opposite direction. So there's not a lot of navigation or anything like that with rowing. You're basically just going in a straight line. There's no climbing. There's no nothing. No descending. It's just like pushing massive watts in one direction.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of that, the navigation side of things has got to be quite the difference. Races like Unbound, where the courses aren't even marked, you're relying solely on your Garmin device. Have you had any problems over the last few years getting into gravel with any navigation, or have you, gotten off course at any point?
Think the only time I've ever gone off course was last year at Unbound. It started raining, and it was the most insane torrential downpour I've ever experienced. It was freezing cold rain. The sky turned completely black, and I just
Yeah.
couldn't I couldn't see anything. Like it wasn't that my computer told me the wrong thing. I just literally couldn't see through my glasses, and I took my glasses off. I had mud in my eyes. I was on someone's wheel, and I was just following them. I was like, all right, I'll just trust this person. And we're just going along, and then all of a sudden, I kind of my screen's flashing, and I realize something's off, and I see we've gone off course, and then we have to turn around, but we missed by I don't know 30 yards or something. So it was just a quick U-turn and flip it and go back. But no, otherwise, I've been very fortunate with the navigation, and I do think that's hugely in part to my Garmin device. I think that its massive screen is super helpful,
Mhm.
and I'm constantly checking it. I like to play around with my data screens to make sure I have that navigation always sort of in view,
Mhm.
because out there in and around Emporia, Kansas, like with that unmarked course, you just really have to be paying close attention, because it can be kind of a make or break it thing if you do end up going off course. I
Yeah.
also like that I get notifications that pop up on the screen
Mhm.
even when I'm in another data screen. So if I'm like looking at my power and a screen that doesn't have the map, as I'm approaching a corner, it'll pop up and say, "Oh, in 200 meters, you're turning left onto Country Road XYZ, whatever it's called."
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so do you switch around between your pages very much, or do you stick to mostly just kind of staring at the map for the most of the race?
Yeah, I switch through the screens.
Mhm.
I like to see stuff like how many calories I've been burning, and the temperature, and things like that. I also previously used to check on the battery a little bit here and there. I never felt like I had an issue with it. Now with the solar, I don't even think about that at all. I
Yeah.
could probably do 4 or 5 unbounds back to back and still not have to think about it.
Yeah.
Especially out there on a hot day with the solar, I can keep riding forever. But yeah, I like to take a glimpse every once in a while at my power. I don't look at it too closely, but just make sure that things are kind of staying on track, and that I'm measuring my efforts, and hopefully
Mhm.
setting myself up to not pay the price in the latter portion of the race.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing I've noticed, at least this season, with the sorry, Zoom. Well, with the 1040 solar being such a large screen, and now you can add some data screens to the map page as well. I hadn't been able to do that before, and so that's been really interesting to play around with, so that you can have your map up, and you can also be looking at your power and some of those data. Um, but whether or not that's useful in the race situation is always a question, because sometimes I like just looking at the map when I don't want to see how hard we're going or how many miles are left. So definitely need to still play with that a little bit and see in a race scenario what information to put on which screens for me at least.
Hmm. Definitely.
So yeah. What about the climbing pro feature? As part of the navigation, it has some built-in functions with the climbing. Do you use that when you get to those climbs? Do you kind of pace yourself using the climbing pro feature?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a course like Unbound, probably not so much. I mean, it's
Right.
not the climbiest course in the world. There's a
Yeah.
couple climbs that show up on the Climb Pro, but it's not a course that's like littered with climbs popping up every other every few miles. So I think when I think about the Climb Pro feature, I think back to last summer. I had the opportunity to spend a month in the Dolomites training, and
Wow.
I did the last week I was in Europe. I rode from northern Italy all the way across the Alps to southern Germany to visit
Wow.
one of my sponsors, and also some relatives I have in Germany.
Yeah.
And there it was just incredible, because I was doing climbs like the Stelvio Pass, where it's it's got I think 48 switchbacks, and it took me like 2 hours with my loaded bike, and you're just you just kind of settle in. You're like, all right, I've got a climb here that's going to be 25K. All right, let's do it. And you got
Wow.
the graphic with all the colors. You can see the gradient changing as you're going up, and you can really pace yourself much better with that. So it's definitely a feature I really love. I use it quite a bit in training, and I think that for races where I don't have the opportunity to recon the entire
Hmm.
course or all the climbs, it's such a huge asset to have, because even if you haven't ridden it before and you don't know exactly the terrain or what to expect, you can get a pretty good understanding of what's coming up by just using that feature. And so, it as someone who's on the larger size of the sort of cyclist spectrum, I'm not I'm not a pure climber. So for me, whenever I'm in a climbing situation in a race, I have to be a little bit more defensive and just sort of think about like, all right, how am I going to measure myself over this hill or this mountain? And I really like that feature so that I can make sure I'm not overextending myself going up and over the climb.
Yeah, exactly. Well, don't sell yourself short there. I know you're not the typical climber, short, tiny guy, but you certainly can hold your own on some of those big climbs. I've heard some stories about you smashing some people on some big old climbs. So yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
be definitely looking for you on those. Well, as we head into Unbound this year, what are you most looking forward to as we head back to Emporia and getting back into that hub of gravel cycling?
I just think the thing that I'm most excited about is just the distance. Like, it's been fun to do. We just started the season off last weekend, or the Grand Prix off in Sea Otter, and it ended up being kind of a long day out there, but I think there's nothing quite like Unbound. It's just such a special distance. It's just such a special race. It's cool to see the community out there and the amount of people that show up for it, and the way that the town of Emporia really opens their arms to the gravel cyclists of the world is really special. But yeah, I think just that distance, it's intimidating.
Mhm.
It's a pretty gnarly race, and so I think the next couple of weeks here in California, I'm really looking forward to prepping for that and getting back into those long days and just working on my fueling and trying to go out and do these 6, 7 hour rides where it kind of just becomes a competition. How much can you eat and how hard can you keep pushing in the last hour?
Yeah, exactly. A big eating competition, a moving buffet. As I forget who told me that one time, but yeah, just keep eating. So, well, cool. Well, we're really excited to watch you go crush it out there at Unbound this year and through the full season, doing the whole Lifetime Grand Prix season. So that will be fun to get to see it in both mountain bike and gravel cycling as well. But yeah, thanks for joining us today, Brennan. I'm Kristen Legan. Thanks for everybody who joined us here today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. See you guys in Emporia.